There was a moment when Patricia Neal's presence alone could still an entire audience. The camera adored her, the stage embraced her, and Hollywood trusted her with the roles that demanded both intensity and grace. To the world, she was unmistakable, the poised woman with the steady gaze, the actress whose talent seemed unshakable, the star who appeared destined to endure. Her image was everywhere familiar enough that people believed they understood her story. Yet the truth lingered far from the glow of those lights. Behind the elegance and the accolades was a chapter almost no one heard her speak about. A chapter that vanished from her memory as completely as if it had never existed. Overnight, the woman the world recognized disappeared into a silence even she could not explain. The industry whispered doctors surrendered to their predictions, and Patricia herself would later confess that there were entire months locked away from her mind, an emptiness no award or interview could ever illuminate. What happened in the hours when her world slipped into darkness? And how does someone return from a life they can no longer recall? Before her story was interrupted by silence, Patricia Neal stood as one of the shimmering figures of her era. She arrived in the entertainment world with a quiet authority, the kind that made critics take notice long before audiences did. Her performances carried a striking emotional weight, natural, sharp, and unforgettable. On Broadway, she carved her place with determination. In Hollywood, she expanded it with an undeniable presence. Each role felt like a step on a path she was born to walk. Her greatest triumph came with HUD, a film that cemented her reputation and earned her the Academy Award. Overnight, she became a symbol of resilience and artistry, the type of actress whose name carried both admiration and expectation. News columns celebrated her skilled directors, praised her discipline, and audiences embraced her as one of the few performers who could imprint a character onto the memory of a generation. For a time, it seemed her rise would continue without interruption. But what the camera captured was only one version of her life. Under the polished exterior of success lay tensions that never reached the front pages. Family burdens, personal grief, and an industry that demanded perfection pressed against her with growing force. It was a fragile equilibrium, one that could not hold forever. Because behind the fame, something was beginning to fracture. Patricia Neal did not come from a world that promised greatness. Her childhood in Kentucky shaped her with a kind of quiet hunger, a need to reach beyond the narrow boundaries of what was expected of her. Acting was not merely a dream, it was the language through which she learned to define herself. When she left home to pursue the stage, she carried no guarantees, only determination, and a belief that she had something worth offering. New York tested that belief relentlessly. She faced the coldness of casting rooms, the blunt rejections that could break a weaker spirit, and the constant uncertainty of a young woman trying to be seen. Yet every challenge only refined her resolve. On Broadway, her talent finally burst into view. Her performances were not loud or exaggerated. They were precise, layered, and deeply human. Critics recognized it, and soon Hollywood did too. Her early film roles revealed a performer capable of holding tension and vulnerability in equal measure. But the path upward was not without turbulence. Her complicated relationship with Gary Cooper, intense, consuming, and marked by heartbreak, left emotional wounds she rarely acknowledged publicly. Still, she carried those experiences into her work, transforming personal fractures into artistic depth. Step by step, Patricia became more than an actress. She became a presence, someone audiences trusted, someone directors relied on, someone unmistakable. She was not just rising, she was becoming the truth behind the fame version too. As Patricia Neal's star ascended, the life behind her public image grew heavier in ways the world never witnessed. Fame demanded more than talent. It required the suppression of doubt, the concealment of fatigue, and the careful maintenance of a persona that looked untouched by pain. Hollywood celebrated her strength on screen, yet off screen, the pressures around her tightened. Every role brought new expectations, every headline reopened old wounds, and every appearance called for a poise she had to summon even when she felt close to unraveling. Her marriage to Roald Dahl, though filled with affection and shared ambition, unfolded within a household marked by profound sorrow. Their son's devastating injury created a constant undercurrent of fear, shaping their lives with a fragility that never fully disappeared. Patricia balanced motherhood, emotional strain, and a demanding career all at once, drifting through days where she was expected to be both a public icon and a private pillar of strength. The world saw only grace. It never saw the exhaustion hiding beneath it. Hollywood, with its finely polished illusions, offered little space for vulnerability. Patricia pressed on, determined to meet every standard placed before her, even when those standards came at the cost of her own well-being. Each performance, each event required pieces of herself that she gave without hesitation. Yet the weight of that sacrifice accumulated, slowly pulling her closer to an unseen breaking point. She gave everything to stay radiant in the public eye. But brilliance often hides the quiet places where someone is beginning to fall apart. It happened in a moment that should have belonged to tenderness, not tragedy. After welcoming her fifth child, Patricia Neal began to sense a strange heaviness threading through her body, a warning that arrived quietly, almost politely, before tearing her world apart. Within hours, she was struck by a series of catastrophic strokes that dismantled her identity piece by piece. The woman whose voice once filled theaters could no longer form a sentence. The actress who mastered emotion through precision could no longer read, interpret, or even understand her surroundings. Doctors spoke with a resigned certainty the life she once lived was gone. They envisioned no path back to her craft, no future in the industry that had celebrated her, no possibility that she could reclaim even the simplest parts of herself. Headlines hinted at an unspoken finality, and Hollywood quietly shifted its gaze elsewhere, convinced that Patricia Neal had become a name belonging to the past. Inside her home, however, a different battle was taking shape. Roald Dahl refused to surrender to the grim forecasts. Driven by a fierce and unconventional resolve, he constructed a rehabilitation process that defied medical expectations. It was rigorous, unyielding, and at times painfully intense. Day after day, he pushed Patricia through exercises that demanded everything she had left, as if he were willing her mind to reconnect its severed pathways through sheer persistence. To some, his methods seemed merciless. To others, they bordered on genius. But for Patricia, trapped in a fog she could not articulate, they became the fragile bridge between the life she once understood and the unfamiliar world she now inhabited. Her fall was not a single moment. It was a slow unspooling, a quiet collapse of memory, language, and self. And in that darkness, the question lingered, could anyone truly find their way back from such a void? Her return did not begin with a grand declaration. It began quietly in small victories that only those closest to her could recognize. A word spoken with effort, a step taken without support, a fleeting moment of clarity in a mind still trying to rebuild itself. Recovery came not as a sudden sunrise, but as a series of faint glimmers, light gradually piercing through the vast emptiness that had swallowed months of her life. Patricia learned to speak again, her voice fragile yet persistent. She relearned the rhythms of thought, the structure of sentences, the gestures that once came naturally to her on stage and screen. But even as her abilities slowly returned, entire chapters remained unreachable. There were days she could not account for, memories she could not summon, and experiences locked behind a silence she never attempted to break. Those missing months became a hidden continent in her life, unmapped, unspoken, and perhaps too painful to confront. Against every prediction, she stepped back into the world she had once commanded. Her performances after the tragedy carried a new kind of depth, rooted not in technique, but in survival. She moved differently, spoke differently, felt differently, and audiences sensed it instantly. The camera captured not just an actress returning to her craft, but a woman who had crossed the boundary between life as it was and life remade from fragments. In public appearances, she radiated a quiet certainty, as if she had discovered something about existence that could only be learned through loss. And though she seldom described what she endured, the resilience in her eyes told the story with more honesty than any interview ever could. Patricia Neal did not simply come back. She reclaimed a place that the world had already taken away from her. Patricia Neal's legacy did not settle into the world with noise or spectacle. It unfolded quietly, the way a whispered truth carries further than a shouted one. She became a symbol not of perfection, but of perseverance, a reminder that the human spirit can bend without breaking, and that survival itself can be an art form. Her later work bore the unmistakable imprint of someone who had crossed through darkness and returned with a deeper understanding of what it means to feel, to struggle, and to endure. Those who acted alongside her often spoke of the calm authority she carried into every room. She no longer chased the expectations of an industry that once tried to define her. Instead, she shaped her performances from a reservoir of strength, built through hardship. Younger actors found in her quiet mentor, someone whose presence taught them that the essence of a role lies not in technique alone, but in the life lived behind it. Her story continued to echo even among audiences who had never witnessed her early triumphs. They discovered a woman who had rebuilt herself word by word, gesture by gesture, until she could once again stand under the lights, different but not diminished. Her contribution to cinema stretched beyond awards or accolades. It rested in the emotional honesty she left behind, in the way she carried her past without allowing it to define the limits of her future. Patricia's legacy remains a testament to the unspoken truth of every performer's life, that the shadows they walk through often shape the light they leave behind. Patricia Neal's life stands as a quiet reckoning with everything fame promises and everything it cannot protect against. She had walked through the brightest corridors of Hollywood, earned its highest honors, and carved a place for herself among the most gifted actresses of her generation. Yet the moment that defined her did not happen on a stage or in front of a camera. It happened in silence, in the fragile space where memory dissolves and identity slips beyond reach. From that silence, she rebuilt herself with a strength no spotlight had ever revealed. Her journey invites us to look beyond the public image of any star and consider the unseen battles that shape them. Fame can illuminate, but it can also conceal. Patricia emerged from her darkest chapter carrying a new kind of light, steady, unadorned, and touched by a resilience forged in adversity. She returned not to reclaim her place in Hollywood, but to prove that a life interrupted is not a life ended. And in doing so, she left behind a lesson that lingers long after her final curtain call. What do you remember about Patricia Neal's story? If you had the chance, what would you say to her today? Fame and shadows, every star has its story.